The council chamber floated in the darkness of space, orbiting the administrative world of Talveris. Inside the massive hall, representatives from 100 different worlds sat in their designated sections. The air hummed with translation devices as dozens of languages merged into a single conversation. Today that conversation was about humanity. Supreme Commander Vectar stood at the center platform, his armored bulk making the podium seem small. He was Draxian, a species that had conquered half the known galaxy over the past 3,000 years. His people were tall, muscular, and enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them living weapons. Right now, his four eyes burned with barely contained rage. "These humans mock us," Vectar's voice boomed through the chamber. "For 3 cycles, they have refused our generous offer of protection. They occupy 17 colony worlds that fall within our expansion zone. By galactic law, these worlds should be ours." Across from him, Ambassador Hune sat calmly in the human delegation section. He was a small man by Draxian standards, barely reaching Vectar's chest in height. His dark hair was graying at the temples, and he wore a simple black suit instead of armor. Next to him sat Jiwan, his military advisor. She was younger, with sharp eyes that constantly calculated angles and distances. Her hands rested on the table, but Vectar noticed they were never far from the weapon at her hip. "Ambassador Hyun," Arbiter Ralseth spoke from his elevated position. The Arbiter was ancient, belonging to a species that had witnessed empires rise and fall for 10,000 years. "The Draxian supremacy has made a formal request. Will humanity accept their offer of incorporation into their empire?" Hyun stood slowly. He looked small and fragile compared to the warriors and giants that filled the chamber. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "We appreciate the Draxian Empire's interest in our colonies," Hyun said. "However, we must respectfully decline. Our people chose to settle those worlds. They are our homes, not bargaining chips." Vectar slammed his fist on the podium, cracking the crystalline surface. "Decline? Your species has traveled the stars for barely 200 years. We have ruled for millennia. You have no fleet that can match ours, no weapons that can pierce our armor, no warriors who can stand against our Crimson Guard." "That may be true," Hyun replied. "But those worlds are still ours." The chamber erupted in noise. Some species applauded humanity's defiance. Others laughed at what they saw as suicide. The Draxian delegation shouted threats and insults. Through it all, Hyun remained standing, his expression never changing. Ralseth raised his hand and silence fell. "Supreme Commander Vectar, what action do you propose?" "A demonstration," Vectar said, his voice dropping to something cold and measured. "We will send our Crimson Guard to the human colony of New Jeju, 500 of our finest warriors. They will eliminate the military presence there and establish Draxian authority. Once humanity sees the futility of resistance, they will accept the inevitable." Jiwan leaned close to Hyun and whispered something. Hyun nodded slightly but said nothing. "And if humanity resists this demonstration?" Ralseth asked. "Then their colony will serve as an example," Vectar said. "We have been more than patient with these newcomers. It is time they learned their place in the galactic order." The vote was called. Of the 100 species represented, 73 voted to allow the Draxian demonstration. 12 voted against it. The rest abstained. Humanity's small delegation sat quietly through the count, their faces showing nothing. After the vote, Hyun stood one more time. "I would like to make a statement for the record." Ralseth nodded. "Proceed." "When the Crimson Guard arrives at New Jeju, they will find our people ready to defend their homes. We will not surrender. We will not flee. And we will not forget that this council voted to allow an unprovoked attack on a peaceful colony." Hyun paused, his eyes moving across the chamber. "History will record what happens next. I hope you are all comfortable with your part in it." With that, Hyun and Jiwan left the chamber. The other delegates watched them go, many with expressions of pity. To most of the galaxy, humanity's fate was already decided. Outside the chamber, Jiwan finally allowed herself a thin smile. "They think we're helpless. Good," Hyun said. "Let them think that." "The Crimson Guard has never been defeated," Jiwan noted. 500 of them destroyed a fortified world in the Kelmar system. They killed 10,000 defenders in 3 days. "The Kelmar fought the way the Draxians expected them to fight," Hyun replied. "We won't make that mistake." Jiwan pulled out a small communication device and began typing. "I'm sending the alert to New Jeju. They'll have about 2 weeks before the Draxians arrive. Will it be enough time?" "It'll have to be," Ji-won said. Governor Sora knows what to do. So does Commander Taeyang. They've been preparing for this since we first made contact with the Draxians. Hyun looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, on a terraformed moon called New Jeju, 2 million civilians were about to become the front line of a war. Most of them had been born there. They had built cities, farms, and schools. They had made lives far from Earth, hoping for peace. Now the Crimson Guard was coming for them. Do you think they understand what they're doing? Hyun asked quietly. The Draxians, I mean. Do they understand what humanity is capable of? No, Ji-won said. They see us as prey, weak, easy to dominate. They've never fought humans before. No, they haven't. Far across the galaxy, on the Draxian war world of Krelthar, Supreme Commander Vectar addressed his Crimson Guard. The 500 warriors stood in perfect formation, their red armor gleaming under harsh lights. Each one was a veteran of countless battles. Each one had killed more enemies than they could count. You go to teach the humans humility, Vectar told them. Show them what it means to defy the Draxian supremacy. Make them understand that their only choice is submission or death. The Crimson Guard raised their weapons and roared in unison. The sound shook the walls. On the moon of New Jeju, a young soldier named Minho stood on night watch looking up at the stars. He was 23 years old and had been born on this colony. His parents had come from Earth to build a new life. They had succeeded. New Jeju was beautiful, peaceful, and prosperous. But Minho had joined the defense force because he knew peace never lasted. In the academy, they had taught him about human history. Every generation faced a war. Every generation had to fight for survival. Now it was his turn. He didn't know exactly when the enemy would arrive. But he knew they were coming. And when they did, they would learn what humans had always known. War was not about honor or glory. It was about survival. And humans were very, very good at surviving. The warning came exactly 13 days after the council vote. New Jeju's orbital sensors detected the massive Draxian flagship as it emerged from slipspace at the edge of the system. The ship was called the Inevitable Conquest, and it lived up to its name. 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, carrying enough firepower to turn a planet's surface into glass. Governor Sora stood in the emergency command center, watching the display screen as the enemy ship moved closer. She was 57 years old and had helped found this colony 20 years ago. She had watched it grow from a few prefabricated shelters to a thriving world of cities and farms. Now she had to save it. Estimated time until they reach orbital strike range? She asked. 6 hours, replied Commander Taeyang. He was the head of New Jeju's defense force, a compact man with gray streaks in his black hair. They're not in a hurry. They think this will be easy. Good. Start the evacuations. Non-essential civilians to the deep shelters. Make sure everyone knows this is not a drill. Across the colony, sirens began to wail. Families grabbed emergency bags and headed for the underground bunkers that had been built beneath every major city. Parents carried children. The elderly helped each other down the long stairs. Everyone had practiced this dozens of times, but this time it was real. On the surface, Minho's unit moved into position. They were stationed in the rocky hills outside the capital city. The landscape was rough and volcanic, full of caves and narrow passages, perfect for what they had planned. Remember your training, Sergeant Hana told the squad. She was 30 years old and had served in Earth's military before coming to New Jeju. They'll expect us to defend the cities. We're not going to do that. We're going to make them come to us, and we're going to bleed them every step of the way. Minho checked his railgun for the 3rd time. It was a simple weapon by galactic standards, using magnetic acceleration to fire metal slugs at hypersonic speeds. But it worked, and it was reliable. That was all that mattered. In orbit, the Inevitable Conquest reached its attack position. War Master Thexal stood on the bridge looking down at the colony world below. He was Vectar's second-in-command, a veteran of 30 campaigns. This would be his easiest victory yet. Scan for military installations, he ordered, detecting 3 orbital platforms, 12 small warships, and multiple ground-based weapon emplacements, his tactical officer reported. Total estimated defensive capability is less than 5% of our strength. Thexal nodded. Begin orbital bombardment. Target their military sites. Once their defenses are eliminated, deploy the Crimson Guard. The Inevitable Conquest's main guns charged up, preparing to fire. But before they could release their devastating payload, something unexpected happened. New Jeju's orbital platforms suddenly released their cargo. Thousands of small objects scattered into space, each no bigger than a person. The Draxian sensors identified them as simple drones, probably meant for mining or construction work. Point defenses. Eliminate those objects, Thexol ordered. The Draxian ship's automated weapons began firing, destroying drone after drone. The hit rate was excellent. 90% of the drones were eliminated within seconds. Thexol watched with satisfaction. Then the remaining 10% reached the inevitable conquest. Each drone carried a shaped explosive charge. Individually, they were nothing, but hundreds of them striking at the same time, all targeting the same sections of the hull, created cascading damage. The main weapons array went offline. Shield generators overloaded. The ship shuddered as explosions rippled across its surface. Damage report, Thexol shouted. Main weapons offline. Shields at 40%. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Thexol's eyes narrowed. How did they know where to strike? Nobody had an answer. What they didn't know was that humanity had spent 2 centuries fighting itself in brutal wars across Earth and its early colonies. Humans had learned every trick, every weakness, every way to kill other humans with limited resources. They had become very good at making the most of very little. Deploy the Crimson Guard, Thexol ordered. If we cannot bombard them from orbit, we will take the colony by force. 500 drop pods launched from the inevitable conquest, carrying the Empire's finest warriors to the surface. They fell like red meteors, their heat shields glowing as they entered the atmosphere. Each warrior was confident, prepared, and absolutely certain of victory. Minho watched the pods fall from his position in the hills. Here they come. The pods landed in a field outside the capital city, exactly where the defensive plans had predicted they would. The Crimson Guard emerged, each warrior standing over 2 meters tall in their powered armor. They formed into assault groups with practiced efficiency, preparing to march on the city. That was when the ground beneath them exploded. The field had been mined weeks ago, not with sophisticated technology, but with simple, brutal explosives buried deep enough that the Draxian scanners hadn't detected them. The first wave of Crimson Guard lost nearly 50 warriors in the first 30 seconds. The survivors scattered, seeking cover. They were trained, professional, and experienced. They adapted quickly, using their scanners to detect more mines and avoiding them, which was exactly what Minho's unit wanted them to do. The mines weren't meant to kill everyone. They were meant to push the Draxians toward the kill zones in the rocky hills. As the Crimson Guard advanced cautiously through the terrain, they entered narrow passages between volcanic rocks. That was when Minho's unit opened fire. Railgun rounds punched through Draxian armor at close range. The warriors tried to return fire, but the humans were already moving, using the terrain to stay hidden. It wasn't honorable combat. It was an ambush, pure and simple. Fall back to position 2, Hana ordered over the comm. Lead them deeper. The pattern repeated throughout the day. The Crimson Guard would advance, encounter resistance, eliminate what they thought was the entire defending force, and then get hit again from a different direction. The humans never stood and fought. They struck and ran over and over. By nightfall, the Crimson Guard had lost 200 warriors. They had gained less than 10 kilometers of ground. Thexol watched from orbit in growing frustration. These are not the tactics of civilized warfare. His tactical officer said nothing. What could he say? The humans were winning. On the 3rd day, the Crimson Guard reached the outskirts of the capital city. They had lost over 400 warriors. The survivors were exhausted, low on ammunition, and beginning to question their orders. That was when they learned about human civilians. Every adult on New Jeju had military training. Every household had weapons. When the Crimson Guard entered the city streets, they found not terrified refugees but armed defenders fighting from every window, every rooftop, every doorway. A Draxian warrior kicked down a door, expecting to find cowering families. Instead, he found a grandmother named Yunji pointing a shotgun at his face. She fired without hesitation. The Crimson Guard had fought many species. They had faced warriors, soldiers, and champions. But they had never fought an entire population where everyone was willing to kill and die for their home. On the 5th day, the inevitable conquest received a transmission from the surface. It was War Master Thexol, his voice weak and strained. We cannot hold. We cannot advance. We need immediate evacuation. But there was no evacuation. Minho's unit had positioned anti-aircraft weapons in the hills. Any dropship that tried to land was shot down. The Crimson Guard was trapped. By the end of the 6th day, the last Crimson Guard warrior fell. 500 of the Draxian Empire's finest had been sent to conquer a simple colony. Not one survived. The inevitable conquest, heavily damaged and with only a skeleton crew remaining, fled the system. Governor Sora stood in the command center, looking at the casualty reports. New Jeju had lost 8,000 defenders, 8,000 people who would never see another sunrise. But they had won. Minho sat with his squad in the ruins of a building, too tired to celebrate. Hana was bandaging a wound on her arm. Around them, the city was burning in places, damaged but not destroyed. "They'll send more," Minho said quietly. "I know," Hana replied, "and we'll kill them too." Across the galaxy, Supreme Commander Vector received the report of the Crimson Guard's annihilation. For a long moment, he simply stared at the data, unable to process what he was seeing. Then his expression changed from disbelief to rage to something he had not felt in decades. Fear. He reached for his communicator. "Prepare the Void Reavers. All of them." The war world of Krelthar existed for one purpose only. It was where the Draxian Empire trained its most lethal warriors, tested its most powerful weapons, and prepared for total war. In the 3,000 years of Draxian expansion, Krelthar had been activated for full mobilization only 7 times. Each time, entire civilizations had been erased from existence. Now it awakened for the 8th time. Supreme Commander Vector stood in the orbital command station above Krelthar, watching as 10,000 Void Reavers assembled on the surface below. These were not like the Crimson Guard. The Crimson Guard were elite soldiers. The Void Reavers were something else entirely. They were warriors who had been genetically modified, cybernetically enhanced, and trained since birth for one purpose: to kill everything that stood against the Empire. "The fleet is assembled, Supreme Commander," his aide reported. 800 capital ships, 3,000 support vessels, and the full Reaver force. Vector nodded slowly. His 4 eyes burned with cold determination. After New Jeju, he had stopped seeking humanity's submission. Now he wanted something simpler and darker. Extinction. "Set course for the Sol system," he ordered. "We will strike at Earth itself. When their homeworld falls, the rest of their colonies will collapse like houses built on sand." At the Galactic Council Station, Arbiter Ralseth tried one last time to stop the madness. He had called an emergency session, bringing together representatives from across known space. What the Draxian supremacy is planning violates every principle of proportional response, Ralseth argued, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of experience. They lost one engagement. Now they plan to commit genocide. Vector's holographic image stood at the center of the chamber. "The humans destroyed 500 of our finest warriors. They showed no mercy, no honor. They fought like animals. We will respond in kind." "They defended their home," a representative from the Kelmar Coalition interjected. "What did you expect them to do?" "Submit," Vector said simply, "as every other species has done when facing our might." The vote was called again. This time the council was split. Many species were uncomfortable with the scale of Vector's response, but few were willing to openly oppose the Draxian Empire. The motion to intervene failed. As the council session ended, Ralseth sent a private communication to Ambassador Hyun on Earth. It was brief. "They are coming. All of them. I'm sorry." On Earth, in the underground command center beneath Geneva, Admiral Junho received the intelligence reports with growing dread. He was 62 years old, a veteran of the colony wars, and had commanded fleets in a dozen battles. None of that mattered now. What was coming was beyond anything humanity had faced before. "Confirm the numbers again," he ordered. Captain Yuna, his intelligence officer, read from the display. 800 Draxian capital ships. Each one is larger and more heavily armed than our biggest dreadnought. Our entire solar defense fleet numbers 200 ships, 4-to-1 odds, Junho said quietly. And that's not counting their support vessels or the Void Reavers themselves. The command center was silent. Everyone present understood the mathematics. In a straight fight, humanity would lose. Earth would burn. The species would be scattered to the few surviving colonies, and even those would eventually fall. "We can't win a conventional battle," Yuna said, "so we don't fight one. Junho looked at her. Explain. We make them think we're going to fight conventionally, Yuna continued. We position our fleet exactly where they expect it to be. We make them overconfident, and then we change the rules. Over the next 2 weeks, humanity prepared. Ships were moved into position near Mars, creating a defensive line that looked impressive on sensors. The Draxians would see it and assume humanity was making a desperate last stand. What the Draxians wouldn't see was the rest of the fleet, hidden in the asteroid belt. Powered down, cold as space, invisible to long-range scans. Waiting. Captain Yuna commanded a stealth frigate called Silent Running. Her mission was delicate and dangerous. She had to make contact with Draxian scouts, allow them to capture classified defensive plans, and make it look like an accident. She found a lone Draxian scout ship near Jupiter and engaged it in a brief firefight. She made it look good, damaging her own ship and ejecting a data core that contained the false battle plans. The scout ship recovered the core and retreated. They took the bait, Yuna reported. They think our entire fleet is massed near Mars. Good, Junho replied. Now comes the hard part. We wait. The Draxian armada entered the Sol system like a dark wave, 800 massive warships blotting out the stars. The Void Reavers stood ready in their deployment bays, eager for the slaughter to begin. Thexal, despite his failure at New Jeju, had been given command of the ground forces. Vector believed in redemption through victory. This time there would be no mistakes. The Draxian fleet moved into position exactly as the captured plans suggested they should. They prepared for orbital bombardment of Earth, positioning their ships in a formation that would maximize their firepower and minimize their vulnerability. Or so they thought. Admiral Junho watched from his command ship, hidden in the asteroid belt. He saw the Draxian fleet moving into position, saw them preparing to fire on his homeworld. He waited until they were fully committed, until every ship was exactly where he wanted it. Then he gave the order. Execute Protocol Omega. The asteroid belt came alive. Thousands of rocks that had been drifting peacefully for billions of years suddenly began moving with purpose. They had been hollowed out weeks ago, fitted with engines and guidance systems. Some carried nuclear warheads. Others were just mass, accelerated to speeds that turned them into kinetic weapons more powerful than any bomb. The Draxian fleet detected the incoming threats, but too late. Their ships were positioned for attacking Earth, not defending against an assault from the asteroid belt. They scrambled to reposition, but space battles happened across vast distances. Ships couldn't turn on a dime. The first wave of asteroids slammed into the Draxian formation. Nuclear explosions lit up the darkness. Ships were cracked open by rocks traveling at a significant percentage of light speed. The carefully organized fleet descended into chaos. Then humanity's hidden fleet emerged from the belt, weapons hot and firing. All ships, attack pattern Gamma, Junho ordered. Target their life support systems, not their weapons. Make them suffocate. It wasn't honorable. It wasn't clean. But it was effective. Captain Yuna's Silent Running darted between the massive Draxian ships, too small and fast to track easily. She fired missiles at enemy oxygen processors, at water recycling systems, at anything that kept the crews alive. Other human ships followed her lead. The Draxians tried to respond, but they were fighting on humanity's terms now. Human ships rammed damaged Draxian vessels, sacrificing themselves to take out ships 10 times their size. It was brutal mathematics, trading 1 for 1 when the enemy had more ships but humans had more will. Aboard the carrier Indomitable, Engineer Do-hyun kept the railguns firing even as the ship died around him. Hull breaches killed half his crew. Life support failed. Emergency lights flickered and went dark. But the guns kept firing because Do-hyun kept them running manually, his hands freezing in the vacuum as he aimed and fired, aimed and fired. He got one more shot off before the cold took him. That shot punched through a Draxian command ship's bridge, killing everyone inside. Fighter pilot Gina's craft was hit by debris, her engines destroyed. She could have ejected, drifted in space, and hoped for rescue. Instead, she aimed her tumbling fighter at a Draxian dreadnought's bridge and fired her afterburners one last time. Her final transmission was 2 words: worth it. The battle raged for 18 hours. When it finally ended, the asteroid belt was filled with debris and bodies. The Draxian fleet had been shattered. Of 800 capital ships, fewer than 200 remained operational. Of 10,000 Void Reavers, less than 2,000 survived, most still trapped in their deployment bays on damaged ships. For the first time in their history, the Void Reavers retreated. Not withdrew tactically. Fled. The surviving Draxian ships jumped to slipspace in a panic, leaving their dead behind. Admiral Junho stood in the ruins of his command center, looking at the casualty reports. Humanity had lost 140 ships. 89,000 people were dead. But Earth still stood. Supreme Commander Vectar stood alone in his private chamber, staring at reports he could barely process. His empire had sent its mightiest warriors. They had fielded a fleet that should have been unstoppable. And they had been broken by a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. His aide entered quietly. Supreme Commander, perhaps we should consider negotiations. The humans have proven they cannot be easily conquered. No, Vectar interrupted. His voice was cold, empty of emotion. We sent warriors. Now we send the harvesters. The aide's face went pale. Supreme Commander, the harvesters are forbidden. They are weapons of extinction. If the Council learns, the Council can burn with the humans, Vectar said. Activate the harvesters, all 3 of them. I want Earth turned to ash and memory. In the shadows of the Galactic Council station, Arbiter Ralseth intercepted the communication. He sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of ages upon him. Then he opened a secure channel to Ambassador Hyun. The message from Arbiter Ralseth arrived in the middle of Earth's victory celebrations. Cities around the world were filled with people rejoicing that the Draxian fleet had been defeated. They believed the worst was over. They were wrong. Ambassador Hyun sat in the emergency council chambers in Geneva, watching Ralseth's holographic image with growing horror as the ancient arbiter explained what was coming. The harvesters are not weapons in the traditional sense, Ralseth said, his voice heavy with sorrow. They are autonomous extinction machines, created during the progenitor wars 10,000 years ago. When a species faced complete defeat, some chose to ensure their enemies would not survive their own destruction. The harvesters are monuments to that ultimate spite. General Changmin, chairman of Earth's Defense Council, leaned forward. He was a hard man, scarred from decades of warfare. How do we fight them? You don't, Ralseth replied simply. They were designed to be unstoppable. Each one is the size of a small moon. They possess energy weapons that can ignite planetary atmospheres. They are protected by shields that can withstand sustained bombardment from entire fleets. And worst of all, once activated, they cannot be recalled or reasoned with. Their programming is absolute. Destroy all life in the target system. Hyun felt the blood drain from his face. How many is Vectar sending? 3. More than enough to sterilize every planet, moon, and station in your solar system. The council chamber fell silent. After surviving 2 massive assaults, after sacrificing so much, humanity now faced an enemy that could not be defeated through courage or tactics or sacrifice. Dr. Nari broke the silence. She was humanity's foremost expert on alien technology, a small woman with gray hair and eyes that never stopped analyzing. If they were created by a biological species, they can be hacked. Nothing is truly unstoppable. We just need to find the right approach. You have perhaps 3 weeks before they arrive, Ralseth said. I wish I could offer more help, but the Council has forbidden any interference. I have already risked much by warning you. I am sorry. The hologram faded, leaving Earth's leadership alone with an impossible problem. Strategist Ji-Wan stood and walked to the display showing the solar system. We can't destroy them with weapons. But Dr. Nari is right. They have to communicate with each other somehow to coordinate their attack. If they communicate, we can intercept. If we can intercept, we can hack. Hack a 10,000-year-old weapon system? Changmin shook his head. In 3 weeks? We have to try, Hyun said quietly. What other choice do we have? The work began immediately. Every expert on Earth in computer science, xenotechnology, and cryptography was mobilized. They worked around the clock, studying every scrap of information about the progenitor wars, trying to understand technology that made humanities look like stone tools. Commander Jiho led a small team of specialists on a desperate mission. Using a captured Draxian stealth ship, they approached one of the harvesters as it moved through deep space toward the Sol system. The machine was enormous, a perfect sphere of black metal covered in weapons and sensors that predated human civilization. Scanning for access points, reported Jiho's technical specialist, a young woman named Minji. There, that looks like a maintenance port. They docked carefully, using the stolen Draxian codes to convince the Harvester's systems they were authorized. The airlock opened and they entered a nightmare. The interior of the Harvester was not built for living beings. It was all right angles and harsh surfaces, lit by a sickly green light. The walls hummed with power. The air was thin and tasted of metal. This way, Minji said, following her scanner toward what they hoped was the central processing core. They moved through corridors that had not been walked in millennia. Everything was automated, maintained by systems that had outlived their creators. It was like exploring a tomb. They found the core in a vast chamber at the center of the sphere. It was beautiful in a terrible way. A crystalline structure that pulsed with light, containing more processing power than every computer on Earth combined. I need 30 minutes to interface with it and download what I can, Minji said, connecting her equipment. She worked in focused silence, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. 20 minutes passed. Then 25. At minute 28, the Harvester's defensive systems activated. Automated weapons emerged from the walls. Jiho's team returned fire, but they were outmatched. Minji died with her hand still on the interface, an energy bolt burning through her chest. But she had completed the download. The data was secured. Retreat, Jiho ordered. Get back to the ship. They ran through the corridors as the Harvester's systems tried to kill them. 2 more team members fell. Jiho made it to the airlock with only 3 people left from a team of 8. They undocked and fled as the Harvester's weapons powered up. Back on Earth, Dr. Nari analyzed the data Minji had died to obtain. What she found was both horrifying and hopeful. The Harvesters are not true artificial intelligence, she explained to the Council. They're more like biological computers grown rather than built. They do communicate with each other, using a quantum entanglement network that's basically unhackable from the outside. Then we failed, Changmin said bitterly. No, Nari replied. We can't hack them from outside. But we might be able to introduce a virus if we can get close enough to inject it directly into their communication stream. Cyber warfare specialist Sunho had been working without sleep for days, his eyes red and his hands shaking from too much coffee. But he had created something remarkable. I designed a virus that won't shut the Harvesters down. That would be impossible. Instead, it will make them think each other are enemies. Make them fight each other? Jiwon asked. Exactly. We turn their own weapons against themselves. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution. 2 ships would need to approach 2 different Harvesters simultaneously, get within weapon range, and survive long enough to inject the virus into their communication systems. The chances of survival were essentially 0. They called for volunteers. Thousands applied. In the end, they chose 2 teams, 2 ships, and accepted that everyone involved would die. Captain Yuna volunteered to lead one team aboard the frigate Defiant. Commander Wanchik, a quiet man who had lost his family at New Jeju, took command of the other ship, Last Stand. The Harvesters entered the Sol system 3 weeks after Ralseth's warning. They ignored all attempts at communication, all offers of negotiation. They simply moved into position around Earth and began powering up their weapons. Yuna and Wanchik's ships approached from different vectors, using every stealth technology humanity possessed. They had one advantage. The Harvesters were so focused on their primary targets that they barely registered the small ships as threats. Approaching firing range, Yuna reported. Beginning upload in 3, 2, 1. The virus began transmitting. The Harvesters detected it immediately and opened fire. Energy beams that could melt continents focused on the 2 small ships. Last Stand's shields failed almost immediately. Hull breaches killed half the crew in seconds. Wanchik watched his ship die around him but kept his hand steady on the controls. Holding position. Upload at 60%, Sunho's voice came over the comm from Earth. Hold position. Holding, Wanchik replied calmly, even as the life support failed and the bridge filled with smoke. Aboard Defiant, Yuna's ship was faring slightly better. The pilot, a young woman who had survived the Battle of the Belt, held the ship steady through impossible maneuvers, dodging beams that could vaporize them instantly. Upload at 80%, Sunho reported. Last Stand exploded. One moment it was there. The next it was an expanding cloud of debris. Commander Wanchik and his crew were gone. Upload complete, Sunho shouted. Yuna tried to pull away, but Defiant's engines were dead. They drifted helpless as the Harvester prepared to finish them. Then the Harvesters stopped firing at the human ships. Their weapons turned on each other instead. The virus had worked. The ancient machines, following programming 10,000 years old, identified each other as targets. Two of them opened fire on the third, overwhelming its shields and tearing it apart in a display of firepower that lit up the solar system. But the virus was mutating, spreading through the Harvester's quantum network faster than their systems could adapt. The remaining two machines recalculated their targets, analyzing their sensor data. According to their scans, the greatest concentration of life in the known galaxy was not Earth. It was the Draxian homeworld of Draxus Prime. The two surviving Harvesters changed course. They entered slipspace, heading away from Earth at speeds that bent physics. In the ruins of Defiant, Captain Yuna and her surviving crew watched them go. Where are they going? Dr. Nari's voice came over the comm, filled with horror. They're heading for Draxus Prime. They're going to destroy the Draxian homeworld. The council chamber filled with noise. Some people cheered. The Draxians had tried to exterminate humanity twice. Now their own weapon would destroy them. It was justice. It was fitting. Ambassador Hyun sat silently, his face drawn. Finally he spoke. How long do they have? The Harvesters will reach Draxus Prime in 2 days, Nari replied. Can we stop them? I don't know, maybe. If we warn the Draxians, if they prepare properly, if we help them. General Changmin slammed his fist on the table. The emergency session of Earth's leadership lasted 6 hours. Half the council wanted to let the Draxians face the consequences of their own actions. The other half argued for intervention. The arguments were bitter, personal, and painful. Admiral Junho spoke for many when he said, "They sent 3 extinction forces against us. 3. They tried to wipe out our species. Now their own weapon is about to destroy them, and you want us to risk our lives to save theirs." President Sujin sat at the head of the table, listening to every voice. She was new to the position, elected just months before the war began. She had never expected to face decisions like this. Finally, she raised her hand for silence. "I understand your anger," she said quietly. "I feel it too. But answer me this. If we let billions of Draxian civilians die when we have the power to save them, what does that make us? We'll have won the war but lost who we are." The vote was taken. By the smallest of margins, Earth chose to send aid. The problem was simple. Earth's fleet was damaged, scattered, and exhausted. Most ships needed weeks of repairs. But they didn't have weeks. They had 2 days. "We can put together 30 ships," Junho reported. "That's everything we can get operational in time. It's not enough to fight 2 Harvesters, but it might be enough to give the Draxians a fighting chance." Captain Yuna's Defiant was still operational, barely. The ship had taken massive damage, but her crew refused to stand down. "We started this," Yuna said. "We should finish it." The human fleet jumped to slipspace, racing toward Draxus Prime. In the cargo holds, they carried the virus code that Sunho had created, along with detailed information about Harvester vulnerabilities. It was everything humanity had learned, offered freely to people who had tried to exterminate them. On Draxus Prime, Supreme Commander Vector stood in the Planetary Defense Center, watching as his world prepared for the end. Draxus Prime was home to 8 billion people. It was the heart of an empire that had ruled for 3,000 years. And in 2 days, it would be ash. The defense fleet was being assembled, but Vector knew it wouldn't be enough. The Crimson Guard had fallen to humans. The Void Reavers had been shattered. Now he faced weapons that had destroyed civilizations before his species had learned to make fire. When the human warning arrived, along with technical data and an offer of assistance, Vector didn't know how to respond. He had spent his entire life believing in Draxian superiority. Now the species he had tried to destroy was offering to save his people. "What do we do, Supreme Commander?" his aide asked. Vector took a long breath. "We accept their help, and we prepare to fight alongside them." The 2 Harvesters emerged from slipspace at the edge of the Draxian home system. They were ancient, unstoppable, and utterly merciless. They ignored all attempts at communication and began their approach to Draxus Prime. The Draxian defense fleet met them halfway. 800 ships, the largest force the Empire could assemble on short notice. They opened fire with everything they had, It wasn't enough. The harvester's shields absorbed the bombardment effortlessly. Return fire from the ancient machines cut through Draxian vessels like they were made of paper. In the first hour of battle, the Draxians lost 200 ships. Then the human fleet arrived. 30 ships against 2 planet killers. The mathematics were absurd. But the humans didn't come to fight a conventional battle. They came with a plan. All ships execute dispersal pattern Omega, Captain Yuna ordered. We need to get close enough to both harvesters to upload the virus simultaneously. The human ships scattered, each one heading toward one of the 2 harvesters at maximum speed. The Draxian fleet, following the battle plan that humanity had transmitted, shifted their fire to create openings in the harvester's defensive fire. Aboard Defiant, Engineer Doyun worked frantically in the damaged engineering section. The ship's systems were failing. Life support was at 30%. The main reactor was overheating, but the weapon still functioned, and that was all that mattered. I need 30 seconds at point-blank range, Sunho's voice came over the comm from Earth. He was coordinating the upload remotely. Both ships have to maintain position simultaneously, or the virus won't propagate correctly. Understood, Yuna replied. She opened a channel to Commander One-Shik's replacement, a young officer named Taman who commanded the frigate Last Hope. Are you ready? As ready as we'll ever be, Taman replied. The 2 ships made their final approach. The harvesters detected the threat and concentrated their fire. Energy beams that could melt continents focused on the small human vessels. Last Hope's shields failed at second 5. Hull breaches began venting atmosphere. At second 10, the ship lost main power. Taman switched to backup systems, his hands steady even as his crew died around him. Defiant was hit at second 12. The impact tore through the port side, killing everyone in sections 4 through 7. Pilot Gina, who had miraculously survived the Battle of the Belt, held position even as the ship disintegrated around her. Upload at 50%, Sunho reported from Earth. Hold position. Just hold. At second 20, Last Hope lost life support. The bridge temperature dropped to freezing in seconds. Taman's hands went numb, but he kept them on the controls. At second 23, Defiant's main reactor began to melt down. Engineer Do-hyun manually shut down safety systems to keep the ship powered for just a few more seconds. 70%. Sunho's voice was tight with stress. Almost there. At second 26, Last Hope lost power completely. The ship went dark, drifting. But it held position. Upload complete, Sunho shouted. Get out of there! Defiant tried to pull away. The engines responded barely. The ship limped away from the harvester as the virus began to work. Last Hope never moved. It hung in space for a moment, a dark silhouette against the harvester's bulk. Then the ancient machine fired one final shot, and Last Hope vanished in a flash of light. Taman and his entire crew were gone. The virus worked differently this time. Instead of making the harvesters fight each other, it attacked their core systems directly. Sunho had refined it, made it more aggressive. The ancient machines began to shut down, their 10,000-year-old programming finally overwhelmed. But shutting down took time. The harvesters continued firing even as their systems failed, their automated weapons still trying to complete their mission. Draxian and human ships alike died in those final minutes. When the harvesters finally went dark, floating dead in space, the Draxian defense fleet was down to 200 ships. The human contingent had lost 22 vessels out of 30. On Draxus Prime, 8 billion people watched the sky and lived. Supreme Commander Vector went to the wreckage of Last Hope personally. He ordered his engineers to recover every body, to identify every crew member. He found Commander Taman still strapped to his command chair, frozen in the vacuum of space, his hands still on the controls. Vector knelt. For the first time in his long military career, he knelt before a fallen enemy, not in submission, but in respect. 3 days later, Arbiter Ralseth convened an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The evidence was presented in detail. Supreme Commander Vector had activated forbidden weapons in violation of galactic law. The penalty was normally execution and the dissolution of the Draxian Empire. Ambassador Hyun stood to speak. The chamber fell silent, waiting to hear what humanity would demand. We don't ask for Vector's death, Hyun said. We don't ask for the Empire to be dissolved. We ask for peace. The terms were simple. Formal recognition of human sovereignty over all their colonies. reparations for the damage to New Jeju, and a non-aggression pact between humanity and the Draxian Empire. Nothing more. Vectar, standing before the council as a defendant rather than a commander, accepted every term without negotiation. But Hyun wasn't finished. He turned to address the full council. You all watched this happen. You knew the Draxians were planning to attack us. You voted to allow it. You stood by while they tried to exterminate my species, and none of you intervened until we forced your hand. The chamber was silent. We propose reforms, Hyun continued. No member species may be subjected to military action without exhausting all peaceful options first. All conflicts must be mediated by the Council before force is authorized. And all forbidden weapons must be destroyed, not stored for future use. The vote was unanimous. Every species shamed by their inaction agreed. On Earth, President Sujin addressed her people. The celebrations were muted. Too many had died. Too much had been lost. We lost 47,000 people at New Jeju, Sujin said, her voice carrying across every communication channel. We lost 89,000 in the Battle of the Belt. We lost 12,000 more saving Draxus Prime. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. We didn't win because we were stronger. We didn't win because we had better weapons. We won because we refused to become what our enemies thought we were. We chose mercy over vengeance. We chose to save lives, even the lives of those who tried to kill us. A year later, a memorial was unveiled on New Jeju. It was a joint project, built by humans and Draxians working together. The monument listed every name of every person who had died in the conflict, from both sides. Supreme Commander Vectar attended the ceremony. He was no longer Supreme Commander. He had resigned his military position and now served as the Draxian ambassador for human relations.